What's up, Packers fans? Aaron Negler here with Cheesehead TV, and I'm joined by a very special guest this afternoon, Maggie Loney. Maggie, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm missing Packer football, but I guess, we're going to have a lot of that, a lot of
Yeah.
delays now. So,
Now it's all about looking into the offseason and, the offseason of a lot of questions. I mean, you talk about a number of different ways that the Green Bay Packers' fortunes could change this offseason. Um, Obviously, it all starts with Aaron Rodgers, his decision whether he's back or not, but everything flowing off of that. I just wanted to chat with you just for a little bit here about kind of the dominoes that might fall, what your thoughts are, try and put you in, Brian Gutekunst, Matt LaFleur, Russ Ball's headspace, and see what you think about a number of different twists and turns that could come up for the green and gold this offseason, starting with the aforementioned Aaron Rodgers. Where do you see this kind of, how do you see it playing out? Like, do you think Aaron's back? Do you think he's seriously mulling retirement? What do you think's going on there with number 12?
I think the farther, along we got in the 2021 season, the more convinced I was that he would either retire or that he would come back to the Packers. I have a really hard time seeing him playing anywhere else, and a lot of that is due to, things like capital that teams would have to give up to acquire him. If the Packers are dead set on kind of running it back for a Last Dance Part 2 Electric Boogaloo kind of thing, then I think Aaron Rodgers comes back. I think Devontae gets
Right.
franchise tagged and then goes, wherever he wants next season. And I think the Packers are going to kind of kick the can down the road for one more year. And now that Tom Brady retired, do we really think Aaron Rodgers is going to retire and have to sit through that Hall of Fame
Right,
class?
exactly. It's a long shot, but again, and I keep saying this on various platforms, it wouldn't surprise me. That's the thing. Like, I understand it is a long shot, but if there's a guy who could find peace with it and just do
Yeah.
it when no one expects him to, I think it's Aaron Rodgers. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. But as you say, right, I don't see, especially given Tom Brady now retiring, you have Ben Roethlisberger retiring. It's going to be a crowded stage at Canton if he does hang him up this offseason.
Well, and Tom Brady kind of eliminates some of the larger threats still in the NFC. You've still got the
True.
Rams, you've got the Cardinals, pretty much the whole NFC West. But, you know, getting
Right.
the boogeyman Bucks out of there, I
That
think.
path, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
Clears the path a little bit, a
Yeah.
little bit. All right. So I think we're both in agreement because I do agree with you. I do not think they trade Rodgers. I want them to. That's not a secret. I've made that very clear. But I don't think they do. I'm with you. I think they do kick the proverbial can down the street. Now, the two big pieces you mentioned, obviously Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams. Let's say they are back. Flowing off of that, we all know what issues they have with the cap. And I'm not going to get too nitty gritty on it, but they're going to have to be some hard choices. Like, if
Yeah.
you look at Devondre Campbell, Rasul Douglas, MVS is an unrestricted free agent or is set to be. How do you prioritize that? Where do you come down as far as prioritizing the players that are ready to walk?
Yeah, I think it's tough. Devontae is the big one, and to me, I think those two are really tied together. I know Devontae has kind of expressed that he's not thrilled with the idea of being franchise tagged. He wants to go
Right.
make that money and
Guys
play
never are,
somewhere.
of course. Right.
Right. And, we've seen examples of why they shouldn't be with players getting injured. But I think if Rodgers comes back to Green Bay, that definitely lessens the sting of a potential franchise, especially if they tell Devontae, hey, this is Rodgers last year, which I
Right.
don't necessarily think that would be true, but I guess we can get into that.
It's a possibility. That's the thing. Like, I understand he probably has a desire for a long-term contract extension.
Yeah.
The thing we heard all last offseason was security, commitment, things he wanted from the Packers that he wasn't getting, or at least maybe wasn't on offer. Um, I tend to think it'll be announced as a multi-year deal, but looking at the fine print, it will most likely give the Packers an opportunity to get out after year one. That's my guess.
Yeah, and if they kind of make those arrangements saying, we'll revisit this again, and it's just kind of
Right.
one of those every off season we talk about it.
Yep.
Here's, one key to 1265, and you can kind of, make it work from
Right.
there. And I
Right.
think Devontae comes back for sure. But then I think you prioritize Devondre Campbell just because we saw what it did to the middle of a defense to finally have a
Right.
priority at inside linebacker instead of, a late round draft pick or an undrafted player that kind of takes over the reins. And I think a lot of that too is just the defense has shuffled so much where you're dealing
Right.
with new coordinators, you're dealing with new signal callers. And if they can remain consistent, even if you don't have Z, you didn't have him for a lot of this season anyway, you want to keep it consistent enough that when you do have to turn to the draft and bring in some new pieces, there's at least like a mainstay. And I think Devondre Campbell would be that guy on defense.
Yeah, I very much agree there. As much as it kind of pains me to bid adieu to Rasul Douglas, I think he's on the back burner. And look, obviously, we're not privy to the contract negotiations in any way, shape, or form. If Rasul tells his people or his agent, says Rasul will play on a deal that at least maybe isn't uh, doesn't give him monster money up front, but there's stuff on the back end, especially once the salary cap explodes in 2023. That might be, he may have enjoyed playing in Green Bay enough that that's enough to get him to sign. I doubt it, but you never know. Like, these are things that could transpire through the offseason. It's interesting. You look at some of the other unrestricted guys. I mean, to me, the big one is MVS, right?
Yeah.
You saw what a impact his absence had on the offense against the 49ers in the playoffs. But if you're franchise tagging Devontae, can you really expend any kind of capital investment, asset, whatever, on another wide receiver, given that you're going to be so all in with Devontae contractually?
Yeah, and I think that's hard to, one of the things I keep going back to thinking about Rodgers playing elsewhere is the amount of time it takes him to build trust with wide receivers. And even
Right.
if he goes somewhere and he has vets, like, people joking about him going to the Bucks and playing with guys like Mike Evans,
Right.
these are pro wide receivers that he would connect with, but the number of years it took him to develop those relationships with Alan Lazard and MVS, it's really hard to think about him, one, doing that elsewhere, and two, what this offense would look like, even if it is Devontae and a bunch of draft picks or newly acquired players, because we saw in the NFC Championship game that he still has a tendency to lock on to Devontae. So if you don't even have Lazard, MVS, Cobb, likely gone as
Right.
an option, who's he throwing to that he actually trusts outside of Devontae?
I mean, the cupboard is bare, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I get, I guess we can look now towards the draft, and I'm not knee deep in prospects yet. Obviously, I don't think many of us who follow the team day to day are yet. I know there's people down in Mobile for the Senior Bowl as we
Yeah.
speak, but we can certainly look at a roster in the sense of what their team needs might be and how they traditionally operate in the draft. And I've already seen plenty of mock drafts, God help us, where people have the Packers taking a wide receiver early. And I guess it's a possibility if there's a prospect they absolutely adore, right? But I still think, and I don't know, Maggie, I'd love to get your take here. I still think they're going to operate as they always have. They're going to look at the premier positions like, offensive line, pass rushers, corners. Those are the kind of the cornerstones that they tend to look for early. And I think they'll kind of roll the dice later on day 3, grab a bunch of wide receivers, because that's a spot
Yeah.
on the roster that definitely needs talent infusion, youth infusion, cheap labor, as it were, especially with Devontae taking up what will presumably be a chunk of change in the cap.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've said this, with Perry unpacks what she said, but I don't think that fans should be surprised if, night one comes and the card is brought up and it's an edge rusher. It just is
Right.
the
Yes.
Packer way.
Totally agree.
And if Z is
Totally agree.
gone, or if you can't afford Preston,
Yep.
Gary's going to need some help anyway. So if you can go get one
Absolutely.
of the premier guys to have a young core for quite a long time, I think that's, the Packer way at that point.
Yeah, I very much agree there. And what do you think as far as not so much team needs, but how they kind of prioritize the draft? And I know very much everyone loves to say, and they love to say, best player available. It's always kind of the best player available at a position of need. We all know that.
Mhm.
But do you think they look to try and build up that defense, so to speak? And I know that's a very generic kind of way of phrasing it, but given the fact that they have an aging quarterback, if Rodgers is indeed back, um, the more games you can have and put out on the field like the one they did against the 49ers, the better off you're going to be as far as what you're asking lift wise from your quarterback, who, yes, will be coming, presumably off another MVP season, but is a year older. To me, it just makes sense to kind of not, you're not taking 6, 7 picks with all on the one side of the ball, but to prioritize to, keep building that defense through the draft, getting young, talented players just to keep games in an area where, you're not asking Rodgers and the offense to score 30 every game.
Yeah, and I mean, you can tell the Packers prioritized running back with Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon already. So, I
Right.
think part of that was to help alleviate if there was a transition, giving Jordan Love multiple options in the backfield instead of making him make plays with his arm. But I do think, keeping the defense intact is a huge part of it. Kenny Clark had said it, in that post game presser that they've got a core of really young, hungry players where you look at,
Yes.
Clark himself, you've got Savage, who arguably had a down year, but Amos should be back even if he restructures. You've got Jair, you've got Eric Stokes, who played really good ball, Chris Barnes next to Devondre Campbell. So if they can keep, the linchpin of Devondre in there and bring in some young talent to rush the quarterback and, do some of those things, I definitely think that the defense could kind of make things a lot easier for the offense, not needing to put up 30 points.
Exactly. And the thing is what's kind of crazy to me, you look at the defense first year in a new scheme, new coordinator. Um, they absolutely had runs where they looked really promising, right?
Mhm.
Like really shut down some top flight quarterbacks. Then they had a run towards the end of the year where it fell off, definitely. Dealing with injuries, of course, but definitely kind of fell back to earth, so to speak. And then you look at that playoff, appearance, that playoff performance, and you really see the promise, right? You really see the foundation that Joe Barry has laid. To me, that's what's so exciting is the sense that this was just year one,
Yeah.
and they played a lot of the year without a bunch of their top flight players. I can't tell you how excited I am as a Packers fan to think about, like you just said, that young core growing together in this scheme. I mean, to me, I don't know how you don't get excited by that.
Yeah, especially, I know the offensive coordinators are getting kind of picked over. It's,
Right.
it's exciting for Steno to be promoted. I think that says a lot about
Yes.
the run game and the development of the O-line as well. But, hopefully guys like Mike Smith stick around, Jerry Gray, and, in addition to Joe Barry, I think that's a really successful core. And, Rashawn Gary got emotional talking about Mike Gray and what he did for Mike Smith and what he did for his
Right.
development. And, you hear guys like Eric Stokes and Rasul Douglas praising Jerry Gray. So I think just that group of coaches has done such a 180 in regards
Yes.
to turning things around, even with things as simple as like gang tackling and not missing tackles when you're
It's night and day, though, right? It's
it
crazy.
is.
I mean, to me, that's such a testament to Joe because, as you say, I mean, that is the same crew that Mike Pettin was working with
Mhm.
for all intents and purposes, right? So and Joe shows up, and all of a sudden, I don't know if it's a emphasis thing. I don't know if it's a messaging thing, but whatever they did this season, it was a complete 180 in that regard. Um, and now we've come to the time, the part of the program but we have to talk about special teams. And look, the news literally broke right before we were about to record that Mo Drayton will indeed not be back to head up the teams. And look, we know he was an internal hire, right? Bumped up from assistant to coordinator. Clearly that backfired for LaFleur. I don't think there's any doubt he looks outside the building for another defensive coordinator, his third in his tenure. I mean, but it's more than the coordinator, isn't it? I'm
Yeah.
not defending Mo Drayton, but this is systemic. And it does seem like this has to be rooted out and completely changed from top to bottom, no?
Yeah, and I mean, I know that there were examples with guys like Debo Samuel and Cooper Cup on special teams, and I think not that you'd want Devontae out there. If you're going to pay him
Right.
$30 million to be
No
your
chance.
All-Pro wide
Right.
receiver, he's not catching punts. But I do think there has to be kind of a mentality shift where you can tell when teams are prioritizing special teams and the impact they can make. Kyle Shanahan said it after the divisional round that they knew if there was a spot where they could measure up pound for pound better than the Packers, it was special teams, and they were going to exploit some of those mismatches. So I think the Packers have to take an approach going into next season where do you want a lot of your starters on special teams? No, because you saw what happened with AJ Dillon. But at the
Absolutely.
same time, if these are guys that are hungry to get to a Super Bowl and win football games, as they've all alluded to, I think there's got to be some ownership and step up there when it comes to the role they play on special teams.
Couldn't agree more. It's crazy to me though. Amari Rogers got so much kind of hate from fans this year, all throughout the season because of unsure returns, dropped punts, etc. In the divisional, he was the one guy on teams who came to play.
Yeah.
Like as far as like every return was clean, he got positive yardage on every single one. Like a guy who all season long was kind of maligned was the only guy who showed up on teams.
This is definitely his best
seems to
game
be
of the season.
seems to be the Packer way for some reason. I have no idea. Well, Maggie, I'll definitely be talking to you again this offseason as we get closer to free agency, closer to the draft. Always love getting your insight. Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thanks for asking me on.